as well as an opportunity for you in the audience to ask us your questions. If you're joining us on Zoom, you're able to write in your questions in chat or the Q&A. If you're joining us on YouTube, please go ahead and enter your questions into the chat as well. We will be monitoring the chat channels and bringing those questions up in our conversation. Thank you so much. And without further ado, Karen Anderson.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. We have just a couple people live in person here, so we're so happy to have you here with us today, this evening. As Amber said, I'm Karen Anderson. I'm the Arts and Enrichment Coordinator at Pasadena Unified and the GATE Specialist. So I have been working in the world of gifted education for many years since I was in my graduate studies at USC. I studied under Dr. Sandra Kaplan, who is the gifted guru over there at USC. And I've worked with the California Association for the Gifted for, 12, 13 years, doing demonstration schools with children, professional development, et cetera. I've been with Pasadena Unified for about 6 years at this point, and 4 of those years have been in the role of gifted coordinator and arts and enrichment coordinator. So they're kind of together in one job. So I'm thrilled to be able to bring some ideas to you today. I'm also a parent of a 7th grader in Pasadena Unified. He was at Jackson Magnet while in elementary school, and he's now at Blair IB School. So, and he is helps me to understand every day the challenges of parents as we go through this process. So as a classroom teacher, I worked in LA Unified, and I also worked in the private sector for a little while as the director for curriculum and instruction. So I sort of a broad view of how education works and how the needs of gifted children are the same and different across our educational landscape in Los Angeles. So I'm very happy to be here with you. And because we have people online and we have people here and all of this, I am going to ask some open-ended questions throughout the presentation, and we'll have a little bit of facilitation of discussion. So we are 3 months into this, 3 months, right? August, September, October, November. Yeah, we're 3 months into this, yet again, new paradigm of school, right? We had what was known as 2021 school year, which I keep saying like the wrong years because it's like it almost didn't happen. It was so intense and strange and at home and everything else. And as educators, we've had to reinvent everything at least 3 times, right? We reinvented when we went into quarantine on March 13th, 2020. We had reinvented all over the summer to start the 2021 school year. And now we have reinvented again this summer to start the 21-22 school year in person, but with various restrictions. It's been very interesting in my job in the arts, trying to figure out performances and music and all of those things, but we're thrilled that our kids are back together. So I'm wondering, at this point in this school year, what are some things that you notice in your children? What are some patterns or details that you have noticed in terms of how they've changed? And what are some things that you're wondering? And I would pose this to Amber also as the children that she serves here at the IEA. Sure.
Working in
Amber, if you can can you hear me?
Nicole, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. We cannot hear Amber very clearly in what you both were just talking about. If you can just get a little bit closer to the microphone.
children can build their endurance back in the classroom. That's been a struggle. Getting back acclimated to homework and the level of homework has been challenging. And also the balance between going back to school and then going back to extracurriculars has been a struggle as well. It's really balance all of that online. And then Nicole, I was inviting you to comment as well from your perspective.
I can't hear you very clearly, Amber. I'm sorry. I can hear Karen very clearly, but
Okay.
that
All right.
slight difference away.
That's okay.
Maybe just echo what she was saying, and just you being a little bit closer, I think helps.
Sure, that's okay. And then we do have parent here. What were some things that you have noticed or wondered?
I have noticed not so much. It's very young neighborhood. She's very self-aware now. That I don't think she has the self-awareness. And it's not just like normal, because we typically attribute that kind of growth to like socialization. It's just like how self-aware she is, and kind of like it feels like I'm talking to another like functioning human being that's a kid at this point. And it concerns me a little.
How old is she?
10.
10.
But she just turned 10 years.
Okay, all right. So a parent here in that's live in person was saying that the self-awareness has increased. So do you mean also like from seeing herself so much?
I think so. I think it's like the navel gazing of
Yeah.
it all. Like she's, because like also she's the only child, so she did this all in alone.
Right.
And so, but she points out a lot of like differences, or I don't like she's making these comparisons that I don't remember her doing this before. And I just think, somewhere along the line, is she started looking inward a little bit, and it's working for her. Like,
okay.
It makes her happy.
So a positive impact of sort of that time alone to really look
like
at herself.
Other kids planning whatever.
Right. And I think that's really interesting. A lot of kids had a lot of social isolation during this time, and then the reintegration is sort of a relief. But for some of the students, they really liked that social isolation, and they got to know themselves a little better. Right. I know for my situation, I was, it kind of was nice because like going into middle school can be very challenging on so many levels. So we only really had like the academic challenges and some social challenges, but not the like, I have to find my room, I got to figure out the locker, who's doing this, all of that stuff didn't happen. It happened a little bit later when perhaps they were more developmentally ready for it. So that was kind of interesting. And then I'm also curious, and Nicole, maybe you have some comments in the chat of the impact of the new school structures this year on, oh, now it's doing that. Is that what you want? Is that okay? I mean, oh, I see, because on there, okay, got it. Sorry, never mind. The impact of the new school structures this year on students. Positive impact, negative impact. What are some things that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think we're seeing that families are kind of reevaluating their priorities as going from, doing just, kind of the bare minimum, even though it felt so exhausting. They weren't doing a ton of different things during the height of the pandemic, and now reintroducing things. It's, a lot of people kind of overcommitted and then are looking to see what they really do want to add back in. And we're seeing kids both find their passions out of that, which is a positive, and also get kind of worn out and exhausted. So yeah, a lot of changes and contrast from how it was 2 years ago. Yeah.
I mean, we've also seen, we actually had a lot of time during the pandemic, right? So we could do some online classes and things, or participate in some things that we might not have normally participated in. And now when it comes back to being in person, it's harder to actually get to all of these things. So we've had to make some decisions for sure. on that. And then I'm curious about, I don't know, we have 24 schools in our district. I've been in many schools over the last 3 months. I haven't really seen a lot of kids having issues with the masks and things like that. I think they're just so happy to be back together. But I do think there's an adjustment of, sort of maintaining your own schedule and coming in and having to, be with the bells and go from class to class to class to class, especially for our kids who have transitioned from elementary to middle, say from 4th grade and suddenly they're in 6th grade in person, or 5th grade, they're in 7th grade, and then middle to high school. That's definitely been a challenge. And we've seen some developmentally immature behaviors, socially and emotionally, in our students. In elementary school, it's been a lot more common to have students who are, emotionally and socially a little bit, not delayed, but they're, doing like crying in 1st grade or 2nd grade, when normally you wouldn't get a lot of that. That's more of a kindergarten type thing. So some of that has been kind of interesting. Okay, so just kind of reflecting for a minute. So our children have gone through a lot of adaptation and change. And does it look weird on Zoom? Okay. I think because it's she keeps switching the thing, sorry. So do you want me to change it? Sorry, we're just not sure why it's doing okay, you're gonna fix it, never mind. So with that, with change comes these 4 things, right? There comes volatility, there comes uncertainty, there comes complexity, trying to understand what's happening, and there comes ambiguity, right? There has been so much ambiguity over the last couple of years. We just have to embrace that which is unknown. And noting ambiguity is one of the highest order thinking skills, right? So that's one of the things that we want our children to engage in, but it can feel really uncomfortable. Being okay with the fact that we don't know how things are always going to turn out. Being okay with the fact that there are elements that are going to remain unknown. There are elements that are known, but other people maybe don't agree with those elements, so these things are very tough. And if we think about it, in all of our roles, all of us as adults have many roles, especially as adults who have parents who are still with us and have children who are adolescents. There's a lot of volatility, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of complexity. So we are both teachers and students. We are both parents or caregivers and children. We can sometimes be both grandchildren and grandparents. We are mentors and we are mentees. So the question is, how are we working through these levels of change, and how are we adapting with the emotions that come out in our different roles? So I might be dealing with a lot of complexity in my role as a mentor to teachers. I'm trying to navigate systems at this point. I might be feeling volatility in my role as a parent, trying to figure out how to do all these things. And I might be feeling a lot of ambiguity in my role as a teacher and trying to decide what I'm doing, what's coming next. So this is just to sort of take in these levels of responses to change and thinking about what are the stages that our children are in these different, as they're navigating their adaptation to the new systems and the changes that are happening around them. So it's going to be normal that sometimes they are argumentative. Sometimes they're just, I don't know what I want to do. Well, what do you think about that? I don't know. I mean, that's very common. Or that they're trying to work out all the complexities of something, or that they just don't understand what's going on and that we have to embrace that. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward here.
We do have a comment off YouTube I'd like to share. We have a parent saying, or it could be a teacher, a commenter, says, I've seen students be more passive in their learning than before. For some, distance learning was passive, so they are still sitting back and waiting to be engaged, less initiative and self-regulation.
Yeah, I mean, that can be a change, right? Because they didn't have to engage online with people. And it can be really scary to now be in a classroom and have to look somebody in the eye and have a conversation with them. So as a teacher, we have to really dig into those instructional strategies for collaboration and really dig into some of those tools that we use for building that language development in our classrooms. So a lot of turning and talking, a lot of structured group work, right? Because if you're just putting kids into groups and they haven't had structure of that for a long time, they don't know how to talk. I was doing a lesson last summer with some, right before school started, with some 3rd and 4th graders, and I had to model the conversation structure with them in a way that I would normally do it with, kindergarten 1st graders. And normally by 3rd and 4th grade, they don't need that type of structure. Like I literally had to say, and I'm going to say this, and then they repeated it, and then I went over like I was the other girl, and I said thank you, and then responded back. So there's a lot more of that modeling because they have been very passive for this amount of time, and a lot of them have been, especially our gifted learners, have been able to get by doing very little, right? If the challenge hasn't been there in the online school, now they're navigating all of these executive functioning skills again back in the classroom, dealing with how to deal with all my stuff and organize it, and I'm going to say the lockers, the locker, the materials, and they just sort of had everything around them in their room, or they didn't have things at their disposal, depending on where our students come from. So it's a lot of change, and our responses to that change can be divergent. So as we look at the characteristics of gifted learners, this is, the broad sense of characteristics of gifted learners that comes from the body of research. So I always like to think about it in these 3 categories, right, of the cognitive characteristics, the affective characteristics, those feelings and emotions, and then the creative characteristics, or those unconventional behaviors. Now, no individual has all of these, as some of these are dichotomies, right? They're opposite of each other. But some of these characteristics might have been heightened during this time and are maybe heightened right now. And we're trying to figure out how to deal with them, or how to navigate. So I'm thinking about, for our parents out there, which ones of these do you see in your child, or that might have been more exacerbated during this time, whether it be positive or negative? And maybe Nicole or Amber could also answer that question. Can you see that okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. There one that jumps out to you?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I want to say the week after that first week,
Mm-hmm.
and March, where everybody watched the news and kept going with it. She quickly learned what the rest of that was about, and going, I don't want to go anywhere.
Yeah.
But she's making those connections. I don't think she knew what the matter meant. For the most part,
Yeah.
it was very way. But I realized that quickly that she started to kind of take some loops to what was going on versus what she previously. But unusual ability to remember and recall lines and objects. And that's points.
Right. Yeah, so taking in lots and lots of information. Some of our, it's very common with our gifted learners that they'll follow a pathway of interest, right? So they might have gone really deep. I mean, I heard parents saying, oh my gosh, I had to take the books away as if as it was a punishment, because they were, and they say like, you have to go outside, you have to go do something. So because they were getting so invested in an area of interest, because they had that time to sort of really dig in. I know many times I'd be wondering, and I'd say, what are you doing to my son, and he'd be, he's like, I'm reading the New York Times, or I'm looking at this map, and like going through all of this stuff and just really digging in. And sometimes I had to go, whoa, wait a second, like we don't need to go too far with it. What were some things that you saw, Nicole? What did you see?
We have a parent in the chat who says, effective. My first grader got depressed, quiet, almost shut down. He's returning to his more creative self now that he's been back in school.
Absolutely. For some of our kids, it was really, really challenging. And they really needed extra support of an outside adult to be able to have that therapy to get through the intensity of the situation and the intensity of the situation and the isolation. So, and that's a lot of that sensitivity to themselves and the environment. That loneliness and isolation could be really, really challenging. Okay. And some of these things, these characteristics are coming out more now as we're coming back in and being, coming in with our peers again. So where some of those feelings and emotional things are heightened in a way of, that extreme need for precision or perfection can be challenging as we get back in with more students around them or other people, can be really challenging there. And the moral compass and sense of justice. It's not fair that this is happening in this way. I don't want it to work this way. I want it to be my way, and finding that balance. And so that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is how do we make for that balance with our kids. Okay, so let's see here. So there's change in the relationship to the characteristics. We have that sensitivity to themselves and the environment, understanding and recognizing complex patterns quickly, and curiosity, asking lots of questions. So these three characteristics really get heightened when there's a lot of change, right? What's going on around me? I'm worried about these people. I'm worried about what's going on here. How is this affecting, my family, my city, my state, my country, the world? That big thing. Lots and lots of questions because they're navigating the complexity and the ambiguity there. So these are the some of the characteristics that can get really heightened when there's a lot of change. Okay. So what are you hearing? We've gone through incredible change. I was just listening to a very interesting podcast about all sorts of things happening across the country with some of these issues. What are you seeing and hearing from your children in terms of how they are navigating these big issues that have been coming out, especially in the last year or two, in terms of politics, in terms of the environment, in terms of racial and cultural inequities, and in terms of their interpersonal relationship?
If you can hear me, I'll chime in on this one.
Sure, please.
And in other support groups, we've been hearing about parents whose children who are overwhelmed by these topics, and these topics interfere with them being able to focus in school and focus on the smaller tasks day to day versus the big picture of what's happening in these categories. So that's been a challenge we've been hearing about.
Absolutely. And what are some strengths that you're seeing as children are processing some of these
engagement? We've seen activism, engagement, intention, wanting to be a member of their community, wanting to get engaged in a meaningful way. And it's helped us with some of our programming. We've been able to design courses to support that need. In fact, we have a really fun class right now. Nicole, correct me when I missay the name of it, but it's How Does Your Brain React to the Internet? They're creating a podcast collaboratively online, and they're bringing up these kinds of conversations in that class, among other classes, but engagement has really been the biggest outcome of those conversations.
Yeah, and we have a parent who says more empathy for others and concern for others, and that's exactly what I was going to say too. I got to help interview some of the potential Carolyn D. Bradley scholars this year, which are 7th graders when they interview, and all of the ones I talked to in their interviews just had causes they were so passionate about, and not just that they cared about them, but they had really big things they were doing to move, to change what was happening in those fields. And it was honestly really inspiring. I feel like, we talk about, oh, we feel so bad for kids these days, and they have not had it easy, that's for sure, but they're so resilient and doing so much with all the difficult things they've been through. So very impressive.
Yeah. And I think what's important with that is that activism, is that ability to feel like they can make a difference, whether it's in their very local community or broader, so that they can navigate the complexities of these issues and their relationship to these issues in a way that that allows them to actually make a difference, right? If they don't have that person to talk to or way to navigate through these issues, they can become existential. And that's where we see sometimes, especially with gifted adolescents, that they can get into this cycle of like existential angst, because they're overwhelmed by the quantity of information and negative possibilities with some of these kinds of issues, and it's very hard for them to see any positive angle. So it can become really dark really quick. So the more that we can support open conversations that allow for multiple perspectives and that allow for research, right? I mean, there's oftentimes with parents, we get worried because we think we have to have the answer, but we really don't. There's so many times that it's very easy to say, I'm not sure about that. I don't know. We should look it up, or they'll say, oh, I heard this, or I saw this. And I'm like, what's your source? That's really interesting. And then I'm like, maybe that's not a real source, So going back and being able to actually like navigate and thinking about what are appropriate sources, and being able to talk to people. What are some strengths that you're seeing, or what are you seeing or hearing from your child in terms of some of these issues?
Up here, but I don't know. I remember she has like an interesting religion there. And so I was like, I think it's like,
yeah.
like, I think because of where he left it out, then like she was supposed to go to some on-campus club, like religious club.
Okay.
And she went one time. I think usually home, school, and all day long. I think I was the last place that she had gone.
I see. So she made that connection. Yeah.
So I do think that that's kind of interesting. Also, she likes to cook. But that's so she can ask questions all up.
Right.
So, like, if you help cook, I'll tell you.
Right.
And so she learns the recipe as a child, and we like tell her the story.
The stories, right? I think that's really interesting, because I think that our kids it's very hard to get our own children. I'm not talking about students in a classroom, but I'm talking about as a parent. It's very hard to get our children to just like open up about these things. Like, tell me how you're feeling about global warming. Like it doesn't happen. But if we have alternate activities that we're doing together, that's where a lot of the conversations come out. And sometimes it's like a brain dump. I don't know if any of you have noticed this with your own kids, but for it could be like going on a walk, and it's like, let me tell you about this thing. And it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And our job is just to go on and on and on and just sort of listen, and then ask a question here and there and keep listening, right? And then maybe some other time I might go back and ask a question about that thing that was a topic of conversation for 30 minutes on a walk yesterday. And it's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not interested in that anymore, right? But it's just navigating, like, what do you think about that? And sometimes I've noticed that you could pose a question with a student or a child, and they go, I don't know, or I don't want to talk about that, right? There's sort of, it's blown off. And then a couple of weeks later, they ask a question back, or it comes out. So leaving the space open. So that idea of like cooking together or playing a game or taking a walk or doing something, you know, that's not like we're just talking about this thing, that tends to be where a lot of these conversations come out. Okay. So these are just questions for you to ponder. How does communicating with each other reduce our feelings of isolation? And then how we facilitate that structured dialogue with our children. So we're going to look at some ideas. So I want to just go into this for a minute. I always sort of frame this in any kind of parent session with about gifted students. And in typical child development, this black line could represent a typical 8-year-old, let's say. And there are certain like milestones developmentally that are well researched and known that are typical in an 8-year-old in terms of their social development, emotional development, physical development, and cognitive development. State educational standards are based on that typical age, right, for grade level. And they're based on like where students would go in that way. Curriculum is based in that way. When we're talking about social, we're talking about those peer interactions, how they collaborate with others. Emotional, we're talking about risk taking, which Amber mentioned earlier was something that was more challenging for kids after this time, and their sensitivity. We're talking about physical, we're talking about fine motor. Oh my gosh, fine motor is so challenging right now because kids have been on the computers. Like, please just have little kids use scissors all the time. They need their fine motor skills. Scissors and pencils. And large motor, that sort of, how do I deal with my body as it changes? And then cognitive is both their learning process, how they go about learning, and their critical thinking. And what happens sometimes in gifted children is this idea of asynchronicity. So I still have my typical 8-year-old here, and this is an example of one possible gifted 8-year-old. So the critical thinking is way over here, right? It's more like a 10 or 11-year-old. But my peer interactions are over here like a 5-year-old. And this can be common. So now I'm crying because you won't listen, but I'm saying things that I don't understand, right? Because as with my peers sometimes, or, you know, my brain is moving so fast with the critical thinking and my hand can't keep up. So I'm frustrated. I don't want to write because my hand won't do what I want it to do, right? And during this time we've had this as well. So I'm way over here and I'm frustrated that you aren't understanding what I'm talking about or understanding the game that I'm trying to play with you. And so I'm going to start to cry, even though typically a 3rd grader wouldn't cry in that situation, right? So these are things that we have to deal with and we have to talk through with our kids. And they really like to understand how their brains work. So sometimes once you kind of explain that and say that this is an area of growth for us, an area where we need to do some work and be structured about it, then it helps them. So with that asynchronicity, they really need that safe environment and flexibility. They need challenge. They need stress management. They need explicit teaching of the social skills now more than ever. That modeling of how do we talk and how do we respond. One of the schools that there's a woman who works as a community assistant in one of the schools that I go to a lot. And I just love it because anytime you're talking to her and a student comes up, she always says, "Excuse me, miss," whatever. Like she models back for them. And then she introduces me. She models back for them to say, "Nice to meet you," you know, all of these different things. And these are middle and high schoolers. But like that piece is just so important, right? You don't just come in and interrupt, but be able to really teach those social skills. Encouragement of non-academic activities. We really need that encouragement of, sometimes we can get so into just one area of study and being able to provide some balance. The other thing that can be so powerful for this time and all times is this idea of bibliotherapy doesn't have anything to do with the Bible. It has to do with seeing yourself in characters in books. So reading books that have characters that are in situations that might be similar to my situation, or that are dealing with issues that I've been dealing with, or that are the same age and have similar challenges, can be really helpful. And there's some really great lists out there of books, including on my GATE page on the PUSD website. I have some lists of books that are really helpful for gifted students. Time management can be a real challenge. So you either have the type of gifted child who's totally on top of it and knows every single time that everything's going to be and was worried about being late, or you have the type of gifted child who has no clock at all and no sense of it whatsoever. There's not a lot of in between. So I think, yeah, every time is exactly right. But no, I don't need to go to bed. Yeah, that's true. And this idea of making connections is also extremely important. So we're going to look at some of these. How do we provide this flexibility? These are kind of some key ones that we can provide as parents. We can allow for a lot of physical activities in the house and outside. We can play games. Games are super important. As a way to communicate with each other. And we can encourage our kids to dabble. I just think this is so important. And I think that as a society, we've gotten really into deciding who kids are and what they need to be doing way too early. So we have students who are, 100% all they do is music, or all they do is soccer, or all they do is, these very specific things at a very young age. And it's really important for our gifted kids to have experiences with lots of different things, to dabble. And it's okay if they don't like it. It's okay if we do one class on something and then we go, okay, you know what, I'm not interested in that. And it's important to be able to offer options for our students, to be able to say, are you interested in doing this kind of extracurricular, or this kind of extracurricular, and trying it. And if they decide after doing a 10-week session or something that they don't like it, then do something else. It's not the end of the world. How many of our students are actually going to become professional soccer players? Let's be honest, okay? It's okay if they want to quit soccer, if they don't want to play soccer year round, you know what I mean? Like it's okay to sort of mess around with things in different ways. And I think that's really important for us as parents. We'll provide that. I think in terms of time management, timers and checklists are extremely important. And engaging in, it's very satisfying to check off the things that you've done. And also to be able to use timers. Like, I think kids need downtime. They need to be able to just have time where they're doing whatever. And they'll ask for it. And you can say, okay, that's great. You can do that for 10 minutes. I know the one that kind of drives me nuts is just mindless YouTube watching, unless it's YouTube live right now. No, I'm just kidding. But just like whatever. And I think, you know what? I watched all sorts of dumb stuff when I was a kid too. It's just a mind thing, break. But you can say, okay, that's great. 10 minutes of that. And then we're going to do this other thing, right? So just having that balance there. I think mindfulness can be very helpful for our kids. I don't think that it's always for everybody, but I think that there's, in the mindfulness apps and things, there's a lot of really powerful tools there to help kids' brains calm down. Now, if they're at a heightened state, that's not going to work, but as a regular practice, it can be very helpful. And then the connection making, and you were talking about this earlier. Our kids want to identify with others. That's a type of connection that they make. There's a catharsis in connection making. They can gain insight from making connections. And there's also universalization. So I'm just like everybody else, or I can see myself in all of these different situations or places. So helping our children to actually to make those connections, whether it's between what's current events, things that are happening, or things that have happened in the past that come to the present. you know, being able to make those connections over time, it's really important. So I want to talk a little bit about opportunities for balance as our students, as our children process this ambiguity in the world around them. How do we think about balance in terms of screen time and non-screen time? How do we think about balance in terms of things that I decide and you decide, right? It can't be me deciding everything in your life. That's not going to work, and that's going to make you super dependent on me, right? That's not where we want our children to be. How do we balance that which is known as intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation? What you're telling me I need to do and what I want to do that's coming out of me, right? How do we process and balance that which is structured and that which is unstructured? That which is known and that which is unknown. And I think what's most important with our students is being able to see that there are both of these things. For every one of these things, there's an opposite, right? There's a dichotomy, right? And there are certain things that we are never going to know, and there's certain things that we can find out, right? There's certain times where we have to be super structured in how we do things. And there's other times where you can make whatever mess you want, right? That's unstructured. And it's going to be fair as long as there's balance. So, and that's the key. So whenever I'm working with teachers, I'm always talking about that fairness. As long as we're explicit in our opportunities for balance, and we are explicit in how it is fair, that even though you don't like this thing, this is not your favorite way of learning, it is something that is important because there are other students in our world that really like this thing, and that's their favorite way of learning. And later today, we're going to do this other thing that you really like, and it's your favorite way of learning. And so there's fairness in that balance, right? And when I talk about this building resilience in terms of layers of control, right? So there are times when in my world, in our lives, things are decided by teachers, right? Decisions are made by teachers. There are times when my choices are self-driven, where I decide what I'm going to do. There are times when my parents decide, and there are times when we decide together, okay? And there has to be balance with these four elements, okay? It can't all be me all the time. That's not fair, and that's not the way the world works, right? It can't all be the teacher, right? I can't have the teacher always telling me exactly what I have to do. There has to be some voice and choice. It can't be all my parents, right? And it can't be all done as a debate and collaboration. But again, if we can be explicit and we start to build resilience and we start to develop autonomy, so students can start to say, okay, this is a time when I want to have a choice, and they are able to advocate for themselves. And they'll say, you know what? I totally agree with you with what we did yesterday and that you wanted to do that thing. And now today I would like to do this thing, right? So we can start to get that balance. So just thinking about those layers of control. I have no idea what the time is. So I need to probably check that out.
It is 6:45.
Thank you. Okay. Just thinking about how much more time I have. So the other thing that I really like to think about with our students is this idea of motivation. So we really want our students to become intrinsically motivated, right? We want them to want to do things because they have an internal drive that pushes them towards behaving in a certain way or doing something. However, there's also the environment or other factors that influence or pull you towards behaving a certain way, okay? So if we don't have that environment and these opportunities out here that bring us into something, it's hard for us to become intrinsically motivated. So we need this balance of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, this push and pull, okay? So our friends might be something that pull us towards behaving a certain way or doing something a certain way. That could be positive or negative. The school might be a way that we are pulled towards doing something, behaving a certain way or doing something. Or our community might be a pull, right? Something in our community. But we also have these things that come from within us that are really interesting. And we want to sort of have, again, that balance of push and pull in our motivation. Okay. I never want to be getting into a negotiation where it's like, well, if you do this thing, then I'm going to give you this, unless it's about that's super extrinsic motivation, unless it's about that balance. We're going to do this, and then later we're going to do this, right? This is something that you want to do. But I really want to get that internal push towards behaving a certain way. So it's just kind of an interesting way of thinking about that motivation, because I think it's so easy for us as adults to try to do that reward situation. And the harder route is always the conversation about the balance and the fairness in how we're going about motivating ourselves to do something, but it's really important. We have this conversation. My son plays the upright bass, and I'm sure I did that backwards. Anyway, and it's like every time there's this cycle, right? So right at the beginning of a season or the beginning of a new piece, a new thing he's doing, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to quit. Like, I didn't like this. And it's because it's hard, right? And so he has to be extrinsic, he has to be pulled towards it, right? But then once it starts to get in his system and then he's playing with the orchestra and playing, getting into it, he's like, oh, this is the best thing ever, right? And he has all this intrinsic motivation. So I have to be super explicit about what's going on here. It's the same thing that happens, you know, if there's something that you're challenged with academically, right? It's just because you're having that feeling of discomfort doesn't mean that the feeling of triumph isn't going to come later, right? So we have to have those like explicit conversations and reflections about that process, because there's no reason to give up when there's times when it's extrinsically motivated and times when it's intrinsic, right? Are there questions about that? Are you seeing anything, Nicole or Amber, or do you have any comments?
I do have a quick question on that. It didn't come from the audience, but just thinking out loud. What do you do if the student has that motivation and yet doesn't know when to maybe put pause on it or take a break or seek a different solution? How do you manage that aspect?
Yeah, I think you mean when someone is just like heightenedly involved in one pathway and can really, yeah, that's when you have to go, okay, wait, let's check out of this for a minute and try something new. So doesn't mean we can't go back to that. You know, I had a student one year, I had him for 4th grade and 5th grade, who was the biggest perfectionist I'd ever worked with, right? And everything had to be just so precise. And he would create the most incredible things that were the most detailed you'd ever seen. And I had to work a lot on balance with him, right? I had to say, you know what? And I would have to purposely make it messy. And I'd be like, this is something you're just going to do really fast, really messy. And I'm like, you have 5 minutes, timer's on, go. And he'd be like, oh, you know, and I said, but don't worry, because tomorrow I'm going to let you spend the whole day finishing that writing, right? Like I would have to have this real balance with him, but I would never get anything done if I couldn't get him out of that, right? And so then I made it like a game where I said, you have to just, it's going to be this quick thing. And I was like, and this is great. And he's like, it looks terrible. And I was like, I don't care. I love it. You know, had to make a big deal out of it because but I think that helped him going forward, because if that perfectionism had been, continuously reinforced and allowed for, he wouldn't be able to manage, dealing with multiple courses and dealing with getting work done. Right? Those, especially in elementary school, if they're moving into middle and high school where they've got 6 classes, you don't have enough hours in a day to do all of your work at that level of perfectionism. So I think it's really showing that balance. That's why I keep putting the scales icon on there, right?
We do have an audience question that I want to bring up really quick. The question is, how is this related to task initiation? She feels like her son is motivated, but has an incredibly difficult time starting a new task. Extrinsic motivators don't work, and he's already intrinsically motivated.
starting a new task on the same topic or the same area of study? I guess I'm trying to clarify.
That's a good question. Let's see if we can get a clarification on that, if it's
Okay.
on a different task or the same task.
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes it's also like, I'm going to decide when I want to do it, especially if it's not like something that you have to do, right? I used to get a little frustrated with that with my own child or with students. I'm like, don't you want to go do this thing? Like, no. And then like 2 days later, that would happen, right? So it's sort of like, I'm gonna decide when I want to start on this new thing. Also, they can be really into one thing one week and really be into something else the next week in terms of play, right?
Yeah, and the parent did clarify on a different task, especially if decided by someone outside of them, for a teacher or a parent. So it's not the kid's decision, but
Right.
someone else's.
So that's where that balance comes in, is when I get to decide and when you get to decide. And sometimes you can work with the teacher on that, right? I often talk to teachers about, like, if you just provide those 2 or 3 options that you're okay with and let them choose, they'll often choose the one that you wanted to do in the first place. But if you say you're going to write a poem to express your understanding of this thing, they might say, I'm not going to write a poem. I don't want to write a poem. But if you say you're going to write a poem, or you can draw a picture, or you can make a short film, they'll be like, I'm going to write a poem, right? So they might come back to the same thing that you thought was a good idea for them anyway. But because they had the ability to make the choice, they're going to be more intrinsically motivated to do it. So I say, just provide choices that are still within your realm of that you're okay with it, right?
We do have a question on YouTube as well, but do you want questions at the end, or do you want to?
Go ahead.
Okay. She says, can you offer tips for the 2E child, ADHD and gifted, transitioning from 5th grade to 6 different classes in middle school? And I think that is related to you talking about this self-determination model and that transition.
There's a lot there, and it's a lot to take in to be able to manage all of that. I think the need for who's going to help you. So who are your peers that can help you with certain transitions, and who are the adults that can help you with those transitions? I also think that's really helpful in the transition to middle school for students like this is there are bells, right? Like, you don't have to worry about the time. You just have to know where you're going when the bell rings, right? And just get there. So you don't have to think about, I don't need to find out where a phone is or find out what time it is, or you just follow the bells, right? It can be very soothing. You can just get there. But there's a lot of elements there. I think who is your buddy is really important. We always talk about our kids just need one adult that they trust in any environment. So who is that adult? It could be someone who is their teacher now or isn't their teacher now, someone that they feel safe with, that they can ask questions when they feel a little bit lost. Mm-hmm. So with this idea of fostering intrinsic motivation, we can look at this at the self-determination model. So I feel competent when I am. Competence is motivated by mastery, right? When I master something, I feel like I'm really competent at it. Although it's interesting how, as we age, we somehow feel like we're less competent the more we learn, which is, I think, fascinating. A difference between young people and older people. I know, like, I felt a lot more competent in certain elements, 20 years ago than I do now, and yet I know a lot more about it. So it's an interesting thing. Yeah, imposter syndrome, right? And then we could be motivated by free will or choice, which is an autonomous model, or we could be motivated by making connections. That's psychological relatedness. So who am I as a person? Am I more motivated by being the master of my domain? Am I more motivated by being able to make my own choices? Or am I more motivated by this idea of connections and being with other people, psychological relatedness? So being able to, and collaborate, make connections to the real world. So being able to determine who I am and what motivates me, which ways am I motivated, can be really helpful in terms of building that intrinsic motivation. So what do you need in order to be ready to move forward on this task? Do you need to learn everything about it? Do you need to have choices in how you're going about it? Or do you need to do it with somebody else, right? That's kind of as it comes to. And it might be different for different types of tasks. So if we're able to help our children to understand that there are different ways in which they're motivated, they can't just say, I'm not motivated. Well, what would help you to motivate? We can start to build that intrinsic motivation. Okay. Oops. Okay. So student engagement can also, or child engagement can also be affected by their identification or the feelings of powerlessness. So that's feelings of alienation and what is known and unknown. So the student's sense of belonging to his school or his peer group, or the student's feeling of incapacity to affect the direction of his learning. So when students feel alienated, then they're going to have a lot harder time with that motivation piece. And they're going to feel like, you know, when there's a lot of things that are unknown. So we want to help our kids to understand how they belong and where they belong. So like I said, there's got to be that one adult and there's got to be that one child. Sometimes I have parents who are very worried and they say, well, I'm worried about school because of X, Y, and Z. And I always say, is he happy? And if they say yes, I go, okay. Does he have a friend? Yes. Okay. So then he has some identification, and but he might be sensing some powerlessness, right? So how can we help him or her to help affect the direction of their learning, to build advocacy for themselves, right? So that student engagement, if they're saying, oh, I'm bored, I don't like it. Well, what can you do to help advocate for yourself in this learning? To help your teacher to understand that you're motivated by mastery or by choice or by connections. You know, if the teacher's never allowing for group work and you're motivated by connections, then maybe you need to say to the teacher, hey, is there a time that we could work with a partner? I really like working with partners when I'm doing this particular activity. You know, so being able to understand how I'm motivated can help with this powerlessness, right? So yeah, we need to make sure we have one friend. We don't have to have 25 friends. Sometimes this is also when kids, parents and children are very different in their socialization, right? So if I was somebody who had a huge group of friends and was super social in high school, and I have a child who has like one or two friends and really doesn't want to go to parties and really doesn't want to like hang out with large groups, I might think, oh my God, there's something wrong, but really they're fine, right? So it just is allowing them to be who they are, okay? So how do we have these conversations with our students, and what questions do we ask? If you ask your child, how was school today? They will say great. They will say fine. They will say, that's fine. They'll say nothing. So how do we actually prompt discussion with our students? And I say dinner table conversations, but I think it's like wherever, you know, if you're walking, you're in the car. Sometimes the car is great, especially if they're in the back seat, because there's kind of talking. So I did link in the presentation, which we can send out to people. And these are actually all linked on my webpage as well. There's some tools here for, I don't know if this is going to share right, for fostering discussions in math. Okay, so some ways that you can ask, you can have sort of mathematical discussions in class. We also have, did I even show? Or didn't show, never mind. We also have some ways of looking at reading and talking about books that are connected in there. And there's also this really great article that's about, it's resources for discussing racism and social issues with children. So there's some, because sometimes we don't know what to say or do. So that's really gonna help with being able to just kind of read through those. It's not like you're going to print it out and like have it and be like, let me ask you this question, but it helps to sort of to open up some open-ended conversations. And again, the key is that you don't have all the answers, right? The key is, I don't know, what do you think, right? Letting the kids speak in that way. Uh-huh.
What's the worst thing that happened? You always
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So what's the worst thing that happened today, right? What's the funniest thing that happened today? What was something goofy that happened? What was something dramatic? Yeah.
Lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
That she was just killing on the past. So my mind because I like every day. And like I work from home, like in my home office, Gabby's home office is there as well.
Right.
So we write down little funny things to say to each other for like,
that sounds great.
To stop her from talking to me during the normal work time. Like, hey, somebody has to be working.
Right. I love that idea. And, you know, sometimes as teachers, we have to do that as well. Because when we have kids who want to talk to us all day long about everything, we have to say, write it down. I want to talk to you later. Because they're constantly maybe interrupting what's going on. But yeah, so there's lots of different ways we can prompt discussion. But if you say like what happened at school today, that's probably not going to do it. So, you know, the 2 stars and a wish doesn't have to be that obvious. It could just be like, what was something that was a star today, right? And they'll start to tell you what, you know, what was something that was really great today. And I always want to start with that. And especially during challenging times, I actually don't go to the wishes. I only do the stars, right? So that they can end the day thinking about things that were positive, right? And sometimes they might need suggestions, right? Well, it seems like you completed this, blah, 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 or whatever that is. I kind of like square in a circle too, because it gives an image to kids. Like what's something that you're like totally square with today, something that became really clear for you today? And what are something that you're like still circling around and trying to figure out? And it doesn't have to be something that was related to school, right? Sometimes they'll think, oh, it has to be school. And like it could be something, it could be, I saw this, you know, picture when I was on the internet about, you know, a rally that was happening somewhere. And I'm like really wondering what that was about. And it's making me worried about something, you know, so what are you circling about? And then what became really clear today? And that kind of in the same way could also be kind of like the connected chain and the broken chain. So what's something that really connected for you today? And what's something that's like, I like it broke, like I thought I understood it and now I don't, right? So it's just different ways to like prompt conversation. And sometimes they're going to need some modeling on that. So, I mean, I will say, well, here's something that like broke for me today, you know, and I wish that it had happened this way, but it happened this way, so that they can relate that you're also navigating challenging ambiguity in your own world. Okay. Are there questions or comments, Nicole and Amber?
I do have a couple of questions that came in from the form. I was going to hold on to those till the end. So if you feel like we're wrapping up, I can ask those. Nicole, do you have anything that's in line with this? Nope.
No, I don't see any new ones, but we can give all the ones that we have at the end, maybe.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, I just want us to always be thinking about having that whole child check-in, so that we're thinking about in every way that we're talking to our kids, that we're really thinking about the social, the emotional, the physical, and the cognitive. And it's not all about just the academic. It's not all about, you know, that push forward with academics, but we need to have that balance of what was something that felt really great today with your friends. What was something that was challenging today with your friends, right? It can be a big part of it in terms of especially as they are, 10 to, well, actually forever, right? So what's the, but really thinking about all of those pieces, and they understand that all of those pieces are what make up their world really clearly. So this is how I can be found. If you have other questions, please go to our website at pusd.com, gopusd.com/gate. There's lots of resources for parents there, articles, past presentations, all sorts of things. Those conversation starters are there. My Twitter is Maestra Anderson. I'm a dual language bilingual teacher, so that's been what that is. And Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, you can follow at PUSD Arts. So please join us there. And then finally, there's some other resources from the website. You can also visit the California Association for the Gifted webpage. And this is the parent page on the National Association for Gifted Children that has lots of great resources. And then as people get the presentation later, there's also some really great books that I think are helpful if you had suggestions. And you can also find those on my website, books that I think are helpful for parenting gifted children. So questions that came out, Amber or Nicole?
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for all these tips, first of all. All right, so we have a parent who shares, they have a daughter, she's 8 and she's in 2nd grade. Mm-hmm. And the other day she said, 2nd grade is too easy, I want to skip to 3rd. What are the advantages and disadvantages of that? She's already been identified by the LAUSD GATE coordinator as possibly being gifted. She reads at a 5th grade level and her school has a GATE program, but is not a GATE school.
Yeah, so 2nd grade is interesting because that is exactly the age where there's a huge transition in a developmental transition. So when I taught 3rd grade, I loved it because I felt like they came in as little kids and they left as big kids, right? So there's a huge cognitive shift that happens there. So it's not uncommon for gifted 2nd graders to feel a little bit isolated because of that asynchronous development. So if they're processing already at a 4th or 5th grade level, they're also often feeling disconnected because some of their peers might not be. That doesn't mean that skipping a grade is going to help that. I think it, because the peers will kind of catch up, and there's a lot of learning that can happen, social and emotional learning that can happen with the peers. So, it's always hard when you don't know the exact situation, but I will say that that's very normal for 2nd graders. So finding those connections, because the other thing that starts to happen in that developmental stage is they go from only seeing themselves to starting to see the world around them. And if they're, and then they can become very judgmental on the world around them and maybe not always super empathetic, right? So being able to help navigate those conversations is really important. It's very common for 2nd graders to be like tattletales. I could never teach 2nd grade, I'm telling you. I feel like, because but it's totally normal. It's always like, she did this or he did that. I'm like, well, people, how about you? Like, let's see the big picture, right? So that's not uncommon. And I don't necessarily, being in a situation that's all gifted kids is not always the best situation for students. So I believe strongly in a enrichment model that it includes interactions with intellectual peers and age-appropriate peers.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful. Yeah. All right. How do you approach and manage teachers and schools that insist on using external motivation strategies that don't work for your child or for the child? Is there research and data that shows fostering intrinsic motivation is better?
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know, yes.
Yes, and it depends on the age, right? There is some of like that the extrinsic can lead us to the intrinsic, right? There is some of that can happen. It's very hard as a parent going in and saying like, this system that you have doesn't work can be very challenging. I would encourage the conversation with the teacher, having the student have a conversation with the teacher, as much as possible, having them say, hey, this is what I'm finding challenging about this system. Is there a way that, you know, we could do something different? Like there's ways that the child can have that conversation that's going to be a lot more powerful than a parent coming in and saying, you need to throw this away. Because there's a reason why that teacher is choosing to have that process, right? But the more, I always encourage parents, the more you can get have your child advocate for themselves from a very young age, the better off you're going to be in your relationship with the teachers, right? So, and this was a big deal during the shutdown too, like having your children, you be the one that emails the teacher. I'm telling you, that teacher's going to listen more than if the parent's always coming in. Yeah, go ahead.
You said this last year, and one of them, that's all this was, so never got around to talk to the teacher, it's crazy. Like, people kids, they don't get the point across. But I learned to know what the trying to teach us philosophy was, because she's telling me what they were doing in school. It's like, man, is she getting you guys ready to go out to the workforce?
Yeah.
So, I don't know, I'm gonna ask her. Do that, and let's know what she does. Go to ask the teacher, and then wants to go to the running club, what is your teaching philosophy?
So I want to know. Yeah.
Are you getting this ready for the workforce? And she told me this very thoughtful email things that kids don't pick up, that she, like I think in the fourth grade, like pick it up. She wanted to be very deliberate about giving that to them. So there's all these kind of like things that feel like a very long time ago.
Right.
They're coming to my house, I'm like,
Yeah.
and so, but it was funny, my kid went and talked to a teacher about it, and so now I probably have my life down.
Right.
Because one of us said, teacher about it, and we laughed about it because this is like our ninth grade English teachers didn't want to talk to our parents.
Right. Right.
Thing.
Exactly. It's always going to be more powerful coming from the student. And also, the other thing is that we have to understand that our vision as parents of what goes on in the classroom is coming from a child. Okay, we are not there. And they have very selective memory and very interesting perceptions. So you have to dig with questions and then ask them to clarify. Well, I didn't like this. Well, did you talk to the teacher about it, right? So you have to be able to have that piece. So I'm a huge advocate for that, to having the teachers be a part of the process with the child.
Yeah, I will say that it's completed. I never had a teacher respond to it. It would be as if I measure myself.
Because she was probably like fascinated that the child asked her that question, right?
She felt comfortable, like, oh, cool.
Yeah, exactly.
I almost left my job.
That's amazing. Are there other questions?
Can you repeat what the question was that his daughter asked the teacher?
Oh, what is your teaching philosophy?
Oh,
Like to explain like why she was doing something in a particular way. So
that's
what
awesome.
was we did this activity and it's like, well, why did they do that? Like, right? Handwriting.
In the fourth grade,
Yeah.
so I'm thinking this is far behind.
Yeah.
It's after a long division that you make sure the kids got the division part things.
And also they know that there's been a lot of fine motor. We're just talking about that fine motor. So some of these things that seem like,
so
they're not
like,
important.
what are y'all doing?
Right. Exactly.
We got an answer.
So, I mean, I have to be so careful with this because, you know, as a person who is a leader in the district and then also has children, I'm very cognizant of he's doing all the asking because I don't want to be emailing a teacher and they're like, oh my God, am I in trouble? You know what I mean? Like, so we have to be really, really careful. Anyway, are there other questions there, Nicole?
Yeah, I just see one more besides a lot of thank you. So thanks to all those who are showing their appreciation. But the last one I see is talking about how their elementary schooler is having a hard time with the transition back to full-time school and any ideas and tips of how to build resilience with kind of filling up your schedule again?
Yeah, I mean, so there's the school time, and working with the teacher on that. And then let's give them a break, because it's taking a lot of load, cognitive load, to be back full time in the classroom, navigating the social relationships, navigating the teachers, navigating where I go to eat lunch. All of that is a huge cognitive load. I mean, we felt it as adults, right? We were isolated, and now we're like, oh God, I have to talk to people in person. I don't know how to do that. How do I mingle, right? I don't know how to do this anymore. So I think, it's okay if we're not doing a lot of after school activities. It's okay if we're, allowing that downtime, even if it's something that you think is not interesting. If it's interesting to them and they feel like doing that, that's okay. And then the resilience piece, I think there's a lot of different ways to sort of build that up, but it's being explicit about the process, helping the more that you can. It's always the long road to get to the short answer, right? So the more that you can explain what's going on for them, to them, say, this is what I see, and this is why I think it's hard. So what are some things that you can do to get past that? And is it a timer? Is it some sort of maybe they do need a little bit of extrinsic motivation there. There can be those times when that's appropriate. So just, and feeling rewarded. Oh my gosh, yeah, I sat there, and we do this in elementary with readers workshop. We build I can't think of the word right now, but we build time. So we have the kids read independently for 5 minutes. And then the next day we do 6 minutes. And then the next day we do 7 minutes. And we always stop right before the kids are going to give up and start talking, right? So you build this resilience for a longer time of independent reading, right? As one of the elements. So it's sort of that, well, look, you did 7 minutes of it. Oh my gosh, you did 8 minutes. Oh my gosh, as a whole class, we did 10 minutes. This is amazing, right? So just keep building that up. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I believe that's all the questions we have. Let me do a final check. Yeah, I don't see any new ones. But yeah, thank you so much, Karen, and thank you to everyone who joined on YouTube. We had a full house there. We had people joining on the Zoom as well from our community at the Institute for Educational Advancement. And so it's great to, we're in Pasadena as well. So it's great to kind of partner up and team up to support the gifted kids in our area. So thank you so much for being part of that.
And I did want to say to our PUSD families out there, families of gifted students in kindergarten through 8th grade, we are partnering with the Institute for Educational Advancement this year for some of our innovation clubs in the spring. So we will be providing some enrichment classes through IEA at our school sites or virtually in the spring. So it's been really nice to be able to partner with them to provide additional services for our students. So thank you to all of you for joining, and for our PUSD families and other families in the community, I will have another GATE enrichment evening probably in January, February will be our next one. So I will get that out to you then. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.